Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Debbie Mollahan. I'm the CEO of the Tigard Chamber, and I'd like to welcome you to the Tigard Chamber 2021 State of Business Forum. We'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Columbia Bank, which helps make this event possible, as well as our supporting sponsor, Vantage Point HR. We are bringing you the State of Business Forum today as we believe our business community needs and deserves timely, relevant, impactful information that they can take back into and apply to their businesses and help them recover and thrive in 2021 and beyond. It is important for our businesses to be continually understanding and assessing the economy and how it can benefit and or impact their businesses. And we are bringing these presenters and speaker panel to you today to bring that information. We will have a brief Q&A following the economic update, and then a Q&A after our panel discussion. If you would like to submit a question, please use the Q&A feature of this webinar that you will find at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available afterwards on our website. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists and presenter for today. Brandon Schroeder is an economist and a workforce analyst with the state of Oregon, and he is going to be bringing us an economic and sector overview. He also focuses on Washington County as a specific area of focus within his role at the state of Oregon. Brandon holds a master's in public administration from the John Glenn College of Public Affairs at The Ohio State University. Our panel by industry sector, starting off with banking, financing, and lending. Dave Hansen will be representing and covering that from Columbia Bank. He is a senior vice president for the Oregon and Southwest Washington region. Dave has lived in the Portland area his whole life, has been in banking for 40 years, and has a keen sense for the banking industry and business in general. Representing the healthcare sector, we are privileged to have Dick Clark, who is the CEO of the Portland Clinic, and he has held this role since 2015. Dick has over 30 years of senior management and healthcare leadership experience. And prior to joining the Portland Clinic, he held a variety of other impactful leadership roles, including executive director of the Providence St. Vincent Medical Foundation, development director of the Providence Cancer Center, and the director of the Providence Together Capital Campaign. So he has lots of experience managing assets in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Representing our restaurant, lodging, and hospitality sector, we're pleased to have Greg Astley, who's the Director of Government Affairs from the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association. Greg has been involved in strategic communications for corporations, associations, and political campaigns since 1998, and has been the Director of Government Affairs for Orla since 2016. His role is focused on advocacy efforts for the hospitality industry in Oregon at a local, regional, and state level. Representing the construction sector, we're pleased to have Leanna Patron, Executive Director for Latino Built. Leanna has been in this role since 2019. If you're not familiar with Latino Built, it is a nonprofit led by Latino-owned business contractors who understand firsthand the many needs specific to this market segment. They are working together with our community and trade partners to improve opportunities in construction for Latino-owned businesses in Oregon. Leanna has also been a small business owner in the Portland area, as well as having a marketing and operations background. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Sean Whitamar, who's a board member for the Live Events Industry of Oregon Coalition. He's also a founding member of that organization and owns his own company as president of Event Team Entertainment. Sean is a 24-year veteran of the events industry and a founding member again of LEO. The mission of LEO is to band together as professionals and entrepreneurs in Oregon's live event industry to share ideas and advocate for the health and economic survival of each of their businesses. As you may or may not be aware, our live events industry has particularly been hard hit with this pandemic. So I'd like to thank all of our presenters and our panelists, and I'm looking forward to a robust conversation. So Brandon, please take it away.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I will get this pulled up. Oh. There we go. Okay. So yes, thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me today. As Debbie said, my name is Brandon Schroeder. I'm a relatively recent transplant to Oregon from Ohio. So COVID-19 in a lot of ways has really shaped my view as an economist since I started just a few months before the pandemic hit. And it's truly difficult to talk about. One of the steepest declines that the United States has seen in terms of its economy in decades, followed by 7 months of our progress. It's difficult to talk about because either you've held on to your job or you haven't. Either your business is surviving or it's been shut down. All that being said, I'll do my best to encapsulate where the economy was in 2020 and where Washington County is headed as we go through 2021. So to start off with, and I'm sure as most of you are aware, Washington County in Oregon saw one of its steepest increases in its unemployment rate in recent United States history. For the state of Oregon, the unemployment rate got up to 14.9% in April of this year, 14.3% for the Portland metro area, and then 12.2% for Washington County, far outpacing anything that we saw in either the Great Recession or the early 2000s recession as well. During that peak, it's hard sometimes to know exactly what it means to have like a 12.2% unemployment rate. To provide a little bit of context, the unemployment rate back in April of 2020 represents 39,000 residents of Washington County who were considered unemployed. Definitely very challenging times. As you'll notice, and is kind of a trend for Washington County, despite the fact that we were hit hard like the rest of the state, Washington County really has exhibited some resiliency when it comes to unemployment and some of these employment statistics. So our unemployment rate, even during the peak, was lower than the Portland metro area, Clackamas and Multnomah County, as well as some of those statewide figures that we saw. Since then, the entire state really has seen declines in their unemployment levels. To date, Washington County's unemployment rate is at 5.4%, for the state of Oregon, 6.4%, and then the Portland metro area at 6.1%. This still represents about 16 or 17,000 individuals unemployed in Washington County. Comparing December 2020 to December 2019, this is about what twice our unemployment rate was in 2019 at 2.6%. Of course, this is coming off of a historic low and one of the largest economic expansions that the entire United States has seen in its history. So it's definitely a difficult comparison. And just a quick note, next week, we went through and did some quarterly benchmarking, basically lining up our statistics with the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So some of these figures will be shifted. So if you get on our website, Quality Info, and you see that some of the numbers that I'm talking about today look a little bit different than they do come next Tuesday, there's a little bit of an explanation for that. Like I was saying, the unemployment rate for Washington County compared to the rest of the state is relatively lower, both for the Portland Tri-County area. So Multnomah County, actually, I believe right now has the second highest unemployment rate in the entire state, followed by Clackamas County at about 5.8, 5.9%. Some of the hardest hit areas are going to be those places that rely a little bit more heavily on tourism, arts, entertainment, recreation, food industry, so on and so forth. So the coastal region, the Bend, Deschutes area, still struggling a little bit more when it comes to a high unemployment rate compared to Washington County. I think that this resiliency in a lot of ways stems from the makeup of our business community, a little bit less of a reliance on tourism and some of those harder hit industries compared to like our high-tech manufacturing, compared to our professional and business services community, so on and so forth. So relative to the rest of the state, Washington County's unemployment rate is pretty low. And when you look at the counties that have a lower unemployment rate than us, they tend to be more rural areas that were less affected by COVID-19 to begin with in terms of their economy. A question I'm often asked about is permanent scarring. So how is COVID-19 going to impact Oregon and Washington counties economy in the long run? I think that this graph, which looks at unemployed Oregonians by duration, the green bar representing those individuals who have been unemployed for 6 months or less, and the blue bar looking at unemployed individuals for longer than 6 months. I think that this is a good data point to talk about. Individuals that have been unemployed for about 6 months or so typically have a harder time getting a job, finding employment, even after the economy is starting to bounce back. Of course, that's maybe during more of a normal economic time. So I'm not really sure what that's going to look like as we move into 2021. Maybe employers will have a little bit more leniency or understanding given the circumstances of COVID-19. That being said, there are about 50,000 Oregonians who who are considered unemployed for longer than 6 months. So definitely some long-term difficulty in terms of unemployment in the state of Oregon. So to talk about jobs, and I will preface that by saying that in terms of unemployment, I don't want to be doom and gloom. We've definitely seen significant progress over the last 7 months, even though we saw a slight increase in our unemployment rate in Oregon between November 2020 and December 2020. We've seen 7 months of economic progress. So in terms of employment, so our current employment statistics for Washington County, for the first time in about 7 months, Washington County saw a loss of jobs. I think that this was to be expected. The way that our surveys work, this included the freeze that we experienced in mid to late November going into early December. So this December data encapsulates a little bit of that. And some of our economists at Central Office were expecting for the entire state to lose, not to lose, but to see something like 53,000 jobs or so less because of that freeze. So I think that that's a good chunk of it. I think the other part of it is during the winter months, maybe there's a little bit less safety, more COVID cases, factors like that maybe hampered business activity. That hopefully is a temporary factor as we enter the spring months. But Washington County nonetheless lost about 2,700 jobs. Most of this, unfortunately, concentrated in leisure and hospitality, a decline of about 14% between November and December of 2020. Grand majority of industries saw little change or maybe a slight decline. Retail, trade, financial and activities, and professional and business services. Probably a lot of that is due to the holiday shopping season. Those are all sectors where we typically see an increase in employment. For instance, professional and business services includes like temp agencies. So that's definitely going to be a factor in some of the increases that we are seeing. And again, hopefully this is not a long-term trend as we get the Oregon data for January 2021 this next Tuesday, which will hopefully be a little bit more optimistic. A little bit more of a long-term comparison. This data, again, looks at employment by industry. It compares December 2020 to December 2019. Total non-farm employment for Washington County was down just shy of about 8%. The grand majority of industries, as you can see, were hit hard. other services, education, health services, information, government, so on and so forth. Of course, as you all know, leisure and hospitality being hit the hardest, down 36% in December 2020 compared to where it was in 2019. This represents a loss of about 24,000 or so jobs between December 2020 and December 2019. Again, at the end of December 2019, we were at the end of a historic expansion. So for comparison, the numbers that we saw in December 2020 were comparable to the employment figures that we were seeing back in 2017. So lots of progress. We're definitely seeing these losses in employment slowly decline, but still some severe economic damage that hopefully will be remedied as we enter 2021. A little bit more optimistic of a slide, in my opinion. This slide looks at the pandemic recession job losses and the recovery to date by county here in Washington. So the total bar, the darker and the lighter blue bar represents the total percent loss in total non-farm employment for Washington County or whichever county that you might be looking at. And then the dark blue bar by itself represents the number of jobs that we have gained going into December 2020. So from April 2020, when we were at the bottom of the recession, hopefully, we've recovered just about 16,000 jobs here in Washington County, which represents 42% of the jobs that we lost in March and April. This is better than what the states experienced. The states regained about 37-38% of its jobs as of December 2020. So seeing some significant progress there. Then if you look at Clackamas and Multnomah counties, again, Multnomah County hit very hard by COVID-19. Clackamas County hit harder than we were here in Washington. And it's interesting because Multnomah County really hasn't seen as much of a bounce back as Washington County or some of the other counties throughout the state of Oregon that we're experiencing. I think that there are a lot of factors going on there. Again, I think a lot of it has to do with the business makeup of Multnomah County and how that plays a role given some of the restrictions in Multnomah County for restaurants and different businesses that maybe are struggling to come back a little bit more than the sectors that we have here, which I think is fairly well represented by this graph. So this graph looks at how employment has changed between January 2020 and December 2020 by industry. There are a lot of lines going on here. So if this is a slide that you're interested in, I definitely can get a copy of it to you afterwards. But I think the main takeaway is that bottom line, the bottom dark blue line, which is for leisure and hospitality. It very clearly stands out from all of the other industries in Washington County, declined rapidly in March and April, to where its total non-farm employment in April compared to January 2020 was less than 60% of where it was at the beginning of the year. Just a truly devastating loss in terms of that industry. And I think that if you look at the trend line over the last few months, it really, leisure and hospitality really hasn't recovered in the same way as some of the other industry, as most of the other industries in Washington County, and again accounts for the grand majority of those job losses that we saw from November to December 2020. I think the more positive takeaway here is that the grand majority of the industries in Washington County, while they were definitely hurt by COVID-19, have bounced back and have been able to get at least relatively close to where they were in the beginning of 2020. And some of the industries like transportation, warehousing, and utilities are actually doing better than they were before COVID-19 due to some of the boom in online shopping and other factors like that. So some resiliency, but obviously particular industries being hit disproportionately hard by the coronavirus, even today as we are seeing the vaccine be rolled out. Probably the most optimistic slide that I can provide is this one. This looks at employment projections for the Portland Tri-County area from 2019 to 2029. These employment projections were adjusted due to COVID-19. We worked with the Office of Economic Analysis, Josh Lerner and Mark. And we are projected to add over 113,000 jobs in the Portland Tri-County area. Some of them very high paying industries like professional, scientific, and technical services, management of companies and enterprises, healthcare, information, so on and so forth. But maybe some of the more positive news that I can add for this is that accommodations and food services and arts, entertainment, and recreation, what makes up the leisure and hospitality industry, are projected to grow by about 12% over the next decade. And I think that shows some optimism. I think it shows that even though these industries are hurting right now, and I can't even begin to imagine the devastation of having to close down your own business or something along those lines, there is hope that these industries will grow over the next decade. And these employment projections were using the prior economic forecast that they had a few months ago. And the one that they released just last week is much more optimistic. So I personally think that these figures are probably pretty conservative, and we may actually see more jobs added to the Portland Tri-County area over the next decade. Finally, a question that I'm also asked on a regular basis is what I think the next year holds. What do I think the economy is going to look like? And unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball, but I know that economists much smarter than myself pay a lot of attention to consumer confidence. So it's something that I've been paying attention to, especially when consumer spending makes up such a large proportion of the greater economy. So this survey comes from the University of Michigan. It gauges consumer confidence, and it is indexed to 100. The base year, I think, is like 1956 when they started the survey. So what does it gauge? The Consumer Confidence Index looks at how it asks average Americans, how do you feel about the economy today? What are your expectations for the economy in a year from now? And how do you feel about making large purchases like a home or a car or large appliances, other purchases that have a huge multiplier effect on the greater economy in the United States? The consumer confidence for the United States had its second sharpest decline between February and April in 2020 from 101 to 71. Since then, it's vacillated pretty heavily. It's increased slightly from 71 index points to 76.1 index points. And this is one of those times where I think that maybe the context can provide a little bit more information than the figures themselves. Basically, what this suggests and what the researchers suggest is that the United States is heavily stratified when it comes to consumer confidence. So individuals who are making more than $75,000 a year have held on to their jobs, have held on to their wages, are slowly becoming more optimistic about today and the economy a year from now. But those individuals who are making less than $75,000 have lost their jobs, have lost their wages, are becoming more pessimistic about the economy, even a year from now, even with some of the news about the vaccine rollout, so on and so forth. Of course, this comes from January, so hopefully when we look at some of those February figures with the news surrounding Johnson & Johnson maybe it will tick up, maybe it will improve. But I think as consumer confidence builds and people feel more comfortable going out and spending time at hotels, restaurants, so on and so forth, we'll see some more of that economic expansion, economic recovery that we are hoping for. This is my last slide. The next one comes from the Office of Economic Analysis. So just to wrap up real quick, this next one looks at consumer spending in Oregon and Washington compared to early 2020. The green bar representing Oregon, the blue bar representing Washington County. There was a steep drop off in consumer spending going into early April, and then it started to slowly increase after that the CARES Act was passed back in late April, kind of stagnated for a while over the summer and fall. But ultimately in February of 2021, consumer spending is down just 3% in Washington County compared to where it was in early 2020. Which I think is good news for small businesses. I think it suggests that maybe there's an opportunity for them to increase small business revenue. Maybe people are becoming more comfortable spending the money that they've been saving over the last few months. So this is another economic indicator that I'm paying a lot of attention to sort of see how the economy expands and grows in the coming months. My last slide, to hopefully keep it under time, again, comes from the Office of Economic Analysis. They just released their economic forecast. I would highly recommend reading it. It's very optimistic. I think it suggests a lot of good news for both Washington County and Oregon. They have actually moved up when they're projecting our employment figures to get to pre-COVID levels. Instead of something like 2024, 2025, they're now suggesting that pre-COVID employment levels might be back as early as Q1 of 2023, which is represented by this red bar. The graph compares different recessions throughout United States history here in Oregon. Very quick decline compared to other recessions, but it's also projected to be a much more rapid increase in employment over the coming years. So I think that this is great news. They noted that another stimulus package, declining COVID cases, and an increase in the number of available vaccines are just a few of the reasons that they decided to move up the timeline for pre-COVID employment levels recovering. So with that, I am open for questions with any time that we have remaining.
Great. Thank you, Brandon. I feel like that kind of tells the story of what happened, but it also shows us that there is actually a lot of hope on the horizon and that recovery, and that Washington County is one of the stronger performing counties. It looks like we do have one question for you related to your presentation. So this comes from Mayor Snyder in Tigard. He wanted to know whether or not you think that part of what is driving the persistent employment losses in Multnomah County is the homelessness in Multnomah County and protests, and how that's impacting the downtown core and the city of Portland. And I realize Multnomah County is not your area of expertise, but you may know of this from your peers.
Definitely. That's a great question. What I will say is I know that housing is, of course, an important factor in the labor market. Having affordable housing means that you can attract a highly qualified workforce. I also know that when you look at the US census data for Oregon, housing is a huge concern. There is a lot of housing insecurity. There are significant portions of the population that are behind on their rent, their mortgages. So I definitely think that homelessness or more generally housing insecurity is definitely having a negative impact on Multnomah and Washington County's economy. As far as the protests goes, I really don't know. I know that Josh Lerner and Mark talked a little bit about it. and I would highly recommend looking at some of their information. They talked about it in the context of in-migration to the Portland metro area more generally and how it's impacting that. And from what they've said, it sounds like in-migration is still what they're expecting for the Portland metro area. So I apologize if that doesn't answer the question exactly, but that's the best information I have.
Thank you very much. I don't think I see any more questions in the chat related to your presentation. There's some future questions for our panelists. Oh, here's a question. How do you view out-migration that's currently happening? Oregon is getting people in from California, but moving bans are swamped with long-term Oregonians leaving for states like Arizona, Florida, Idaho. At the moment, the total is in migration, but if it flips to an out migration, how will it impact these charts?
Again, I think that one of the biggest comparative advantages that Oregon has is our ability to attract a great workforce here. I mean, Oregon is beautiful. It's a wonderful place to be a part of. I mean, it's why I moved from Ohio for at least that's a part of it. And so I definitely think that if folks aren't coming to Oregon, it will have a negative impact on our labor market. Whether or not that's going to happen after COVID, I really don't know.
Great. Well, Brandon, thank you very much. And now it is time for us to move on to our industry sector with our panelists. I'd like to ask all of our panelists to come on screen. And again, I'd like to thank our sponsors that are making today's forum possible. First of all, big shout out to Columbia Bank, who is our presenting sponsor, and also one of our panelists with Dave Hansen. And we also have a supporting sponsor with Vantage Point HR. So now we're going to move into the industry sector. We've actually already got, I can see 2 questions queued up. Looks like Greg is going to be in the hot seat here as we go through this because there's some open questions for him. And I'm going to start this first question off with Dave Hansen from Columbia Bank. And so each panelist is going to answer the same question based on how it's coming in with their sector. And then we will move on to the next question. We have a total of 5 questions for our panelists. So Dave, overall, what were the biggest challenges for businesses in your sector, kind of in that lending, financing, and banking?
Yeah, that's banks we're generalists in terms of how we impact the economy because we're one of the integral parts of providing funding and all. Basically, what we've seen, of course, with shutdowns of businesses as a result of COVID-19, wildfires, social disruption, all these things have impacted negatively a lot of the businesses. Probably the hardest hit area is retail and restaurants. They, of course, have been hugely impacted by COVID. There are some strange things that we've seen too, though. This is not all bad. Construction has boomed. We have seen a lot of, especially in the residential area, remodeling, and also providers of materials, those types of things. We've seen a lot of activity because people are spending more time at home. And so they are doing more remodeling and that type of thing. So from our perspective, it's been kind of uneven. Some doing poorly, some doing really well. Obviously, what we've been in the middle of, and one of the later questions hits this, is banks have also needed to be open. We're an essential industry, and that's been challenging too at times with COVID. Trying to manage workforce challenges, people having their kids at home, needing to be challenged by daycares being closed, that type of thing. So there's been a myriad of things that have really challenged both the banking industry and the clients that we serve.
Thank you very much. So Dick, would you like to answer this question for your sector? Biggest challenges for businesses in the healthcare sector?
Thanks, Debbie. Thanks for inviting me to participate this morning. So we had a lot of challenges starting last March. And then as we go forward, certainly we have some new challenges. I was struck by some of the things that Brandon was talking about in the employment sector. So for example, the Portland Clinic has 5 locations. 3 of them are located in Washington County. Pre-COVID, we were at about 550 employees throughout our entire workforce, with about 350 being in Washington County. What happened in March and April, because of a variety of things, of people staying away from healthcare and the governor's order to shut down surgery centers for non-emergent conditions, we had to furlough about 40% of those 550 employees. And then by June, we permanently laid off about 20% of those folks. So historic changes for the Portland Clinic. Now, as Brandon was mentioning, we're in a position of rehiring. We will not go back up to pre-COVID levels, but currently we have about 35 openings. And we are really searching for qualified folks in healthcare. And this is not unique just to the Portland Clinic. All of healthcare is this way. Unfortunately, some of those people are fatigued and they may not want to return to healthcare. They may choose to jump into a new career. So this is going to be a challenge for the future. And then certainly the wider distribution of vaccines is really essential for all of our businesses, and certainly for healthcare as well. And then last but not least, what's happening and a challenge for the future is that some businesses, private equity and others, larger companies, are using this as an opportunity for consolidation in healthcare. And so what the consumer may face in the future are new entrants into the healthcare marketplace, whether that be through pharmacies or other things, or quite frankly, just some single doc practitioners or 2 or 3 docs combining into a larger company. So a lot of future trends are coming out of this as well as people recover from COVID.
Great, thank you very much, Dick. So Leanna, I'm going to pop over to you to talk about it from a construction perspective, kind of the biggest challenges in your sector.
Sure. I would say that we probably have some similarities, and everybody else, you've got kids at home, but you need to go work off site. Absolutely, that's a challenge. But I have identified that our number one thing with construction would be safety. I have it bolded here on my notes. Safety from the job site to home. I mean, we do as an organization represent Latinos in construction. So a lot of my answers will also relate to that, in particular in our community. If you guys didn't know, Latinos make up 30% of the construction industry nationwide. So everything from safety. So safety restrictions were rapidly changing construction. In construction, there's multiple moving parts all at the same time. How are you making it clear to your employees that maybe over 30% of them are Latinos and English is not their preferred language? How did you pivot as a business to accommodate them? That was, that was quite a challenge to help those businesses, because construction still to this day, and especially in Oregon, is still owned by white males. So it's a very dominant industry there, although the workforce is the largest minority grouping is Latinos. So, but also Latinos in a whole at home, they are the most impacted cultural demographic for it. They have multi-generational housing, and their cultural and family activities are large groupings. So how are we delivering that message out there so that they understood in a culturally specific way into safety?
Great, thank you very much. Sean, I'm going to hop over to you. Same question. Your industry's just got slammed big time. So
yeah, it's we were the first to be shut down. We'll be one of the first to come back for obvious reasons due to COVID. Really, the full scope of our industry is not known. We by nature live invisible realm. The events are the star of what we do, and not the businesses or the people, right, that actually put them on. So COVID has taught us didn't have a national lobby body. We didn't have a state level lobby body so that our industry was fully understood. That's why performance venues had specific legislation passed for them. They lobby body, they had some crowd there and were well known. And so the rest of our industry needs a similar manner of help, because ultimately the bill that was passed for them, the Shuttered Venues Act, served about 8% people that do events. So we need a similar bill for event producers, not just in live entertainment, but corporate events, trade shows, weddings, private events, fundraisers, political events, fairs, festivals, sporting events such as rodeos and marathons. So there's a big industry here. We have about 35,000 employed and contribute about $8 billion to Oregon's economy each year. And we've been idle for a year. So imagine the impact that brings. Dick touched on something that's also affecting our industry. We have specifically trained people that have now been out of work for a year, specific skills that they've achieved or worked on for a number of years, sometimes 20 and 30-year long careers, specifically trained to do specific jobs. And now those people have found other employment and won't likely return to the live events industry. So just like Dick's mentioning, we are going to have some challenges when it comes to getting people back into our workforce as well. So so those are a couple of the big ones: not being known, and then getting people back trained and ready to do events when the time comes that we're able to do in person again.
Great. Thank you, Sean. And last but not least, Greg, if you'd like to answer that for your sector, because you're representing restaurants and lodging, and that was also majorly impacted. So biggest challenges.
Yeah, how much time do I have?
2 minutes.
I think as we all saw by Brandon's presentation, the hospitality industry, restaurants and lodging have been hit the hardest of any. People forget that hotels really, although not formally shut down by executive order, they were some of the first ones to suffer the impacts of this pandemic. The travel restrictions, the restrictions on gathering sizes meant that hotels weren't able to host the kind of live events that Sean was just talking about, that conventions had to go away, weddings, all those kinds of events that you would normally see at some of these hotels, they weren't able to take part. The Portland Hilton has been closed since March of last year. They have not been able to open their doors because the occupancy rate is so low that it just doesn't make sense for them to do so. So sounding the alarm a little bit about what's happened on the lodging side has been a challenge for us and for that industry. Obviously on the restaurant side, it's been the shutdowns, the inconsistency, the uncertainty. We were shut down just before St. Patrick's Day last year. Then we were allowed to reopen in phases. And then we were shut down again, and those phases became categories. For restaurants, it's not like a regular retail store where you have items on the shelf that if you close for 2 weeks, they'll be fine. You have perishable foods that you've ordered, that you've stocked up in anticipation of guests coming in. And at the very beginning, the shutdowns were happening in less than 48 hours, giving operators no time to do anything with those perishable goods, not to mention the fact that employees were scheduled and then had to be told they weren't able to come in. Again, much like has just been mentioned, one of the biggest challenges we're seeing right now as we are able to reopen is the workforce just isn't there. People who formerly were working in jobs in the restaurant industry in particular have sought employment elsewhere because of the uncertainty, not knowing whether your county, your employer was going to be able to reopen. And then even if they were, not knowing if 2 weeks later you wouldn't be able to work, just meant that they had to seek some certainty elsewhere. So those are some of the biggest issues that we've seen. Additionally, the supply chain has been a major problem from the very beginning. Initially, the personal protective equipment that we had to get in order to reopen safely, obviously there was a lot of competition for that, but then the sudden shutdown nationwide of restaurants in particular meant that you had all the folks up the supply chain, and that included, folks like farmers and fishermen and long haul truckers, to the folks, the vendors that supply the food and the silverware and everything else, suddenly backed up or not able to have it. Farms were shut down, which meant protein prices were going up. So it's been a mess of a year for sure.
Wow, the complexities that I never actually really thought of when just looking at a restaurant closure or a restricted operation. Thank you. So I'm going to start with you for the next question, where hopefully there's some glimmers of light and hope. So despite all of those challenges, what success stories did you see in 2020 in your sector as businesses had to innovate, pivot, whether it was technology, process, structure, navigating all those restrictions?
Yeah, well, Debbie, you just hit on one of the key words there, which was innovate. The restaurant industry is incredibly resilient, very creative, very innovative. And when a problem's put in front of them, they find a way to get to a solution. And so we were able to work with both local government entities as well as the state on outdoor dining expansion, as an example. Portland, Bend, and other cities were very receptive to opening up parking spaces on streets to allow for expanded outdoor dining. The OLCC was very quick to fast track the permitting process so that those restaurants could serve alcohol outside. We've seen some advances in technology as well, and we're going to continue to see that, I think. Reading an article yesterday talking about some of the drive-through technology that you're going to see in the future, logging in ahead of time, facial recognition if you agree to it, scanning your license plate, some of which sounds very scary, very big brother, but all of it's intended to help make the process more smooth and get folks what they need when they need it. So we do see some hope on the horizon. It's definitely going to be another challenging year, though. We don't see full recovery for our industry for at least another 12 to 18 months.
Wow. Okay. So I think I'm going to pop that question over to you, Dick. So success stories in your sector in 2020.
I believe that there are a lot of success stories, some silver linings. I'm an optimist by nature. I would say globally, leadership. Our team learned how to be resilient and how to pull together. And you have to have something like this to really be all hands on deck. And so I think we're stronger for that. We didn't ask for it, but we had to deal with it. And so that was very helpful. Specifically to our industry, the advent of greater telehealth. In February, and this is just at the Portland Clinic, we had less than 1% of our visits were through some form of telehealth, whether that be video or telephone. By April, 66% of our visits were being done through telehealth. And a lot of that was, they had to be. If we wanted to continue patient care, we chose to close 2 of our 5 clinics, and there were restrictions. We were all very conscious of not bringing older people into our clinics, and so we pivoted really quickly. We set up our telehealth system in 7 days, which is rocket speed for us. Usually if we had our druthers, it would take several months to do it, but we had to do it. And really a lot of other healthcare had to do that as well. Kaiser has always been on the forefront of telehealth, but other systems were just slowly moving that way. And I believe telehealth is here to stay. Now, it should not be a substitute in totality for inpatient care. That's still very necessary, but there are some things that can be done safely and conveniently and with quality through telehealth. For the most part, our visits now have migrated down to about 10 to 15% telehealth, but I don't think they're going to drop below that. And we're all getting used to using things like Zoom and our phones for a lot of things that we normally wouldn't have been in the past, and telehealth is one of those.
Great, thank you very much. So Sean, I'm going to hop it over to you. I know lots and lots of doom and gloom, unfortunately, for live events. But were there some pockets of like success and innovation in there?
Certainly, Debbie. by nature, our industry was highly fractured pre-COVID. There are so many players in our field: event production and floral and tenting and ticketing and security and scenery and audio visual. And it's big when you talk about it, right? So we're a bunch of micro and small businesses that make the live events industry. So pre-COVID, we didn't have this national voice. So the live event mission was created out of COVID, due to COVID. And LEO, the Live Events Industry of Oregon, will actually become LEC, the Oregon chapter, here soon. We're formalizing that now. We will national lobby, but will speak to all these businesses. So that's highly encouraging. We've been able to connect with many events companies across this great country and really get our voices and aligned. We now have 24 state level chapters like Leo, so 23 other states other than Oregon, and this national body that will exist in perpetuity now moving forward. There was a second sort of glimmer of hope, this push to virtual events. I'm a DJ and master, and he's an event producer myself, and I'm seated in a home office, and I have a 55-inch TV, a 2-inch TV, and a MacBook, and a PC, and lights, and a DR. I'm in a green screen studio right now where I produce some small events virtually over Zoom, other formats. The challenge is it was marginally helpful for just a select few businesses in our industry, and virtual generates far less revenue for well. So that I may have been paid $1,500 for virtually, a client might be willing to pay $250 or $350 for. And my fixed costs haven't changed to produce those events, right? I still have the overheads and the cost to have the equipment I have. The pivot to virtual is more about surviving and not thriving. And it really had the most impact that it helped a few vendors maintain client relationships. It gave a view to the future, and it helped charities continue fundraising, even though it was at a reduced rate of success. Ultimately, our membership is scrappy and persevered. Our members have cashed in savings and life insurance policies. They've sold off inventory and homes. They've taken the allowable forbearance that was given to them by credit card companies, mortgage underwriters, and people that lease buildings to them. And we've all added debt in the form of EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, to remain afloat. So we're here. We've lost about 20% of our businesses to date. We'll lose some more over the next several months as this goes on. But there were a couple positives. LEC and the push to virtual did help some of us. And we now have a much bigger voice than we had pre-COVID.
Great. Thank you very much, Sean. So Leanna, in your construction sector, and particularly Latino community focused, what were the success stories that you saw as you guys navigated through that?
Sure. I mean, the obvious one, construction was considered essential. Construction itself has been fairly consistent, other than especially those few kind of first months, March and April, a bit of floundering. Residential construction was mostly impacted, excluding landscaping and landscaping construction because it was outside. And then we saw that commercial jobs at the onset of it all were postponed more than they were canceled, as everyone was kind of figuring it out there. But so we also had that opportunity that I really felt like our industry and our community took that as a way to start their business. So maybe they were unemployed due to the pandemic. Maybe they've been thinking about it. They've had extra time on their hands, and they decided that they wanted to pursue opening up their construction business. And then also maybe that they, already had a business, but they had a little bit more time on their hands again, and they wanted to look at really strengthening their processes and the way that they did things to improve their focus, to maybe grow, and however they were doing it. So our industry took this time to not only figure out what we're supposed to do, but also how we might be able to grow. And then from the Latino community themselves, and also some of the older generations within the construction community, technology certainly was not a priority. A lot of it was still done in that basic way, pencil and paper, so to speak. And so I felt like they really embraced this as an opportunity to grow within it. I mean, we didn't grow really far with our technology, but certainly we have. So they made it a priority.
Great. Thank you, Leanna. Now, Dave, to you, with banking and financing and lending, you were an essential business, but then you necessarily couldn't have your customer in your lobby. So what success stories did you see in your industry?
Yeah, the biggest thing for us, and some of what I'm going to say kind of parallels what Dick Clark said. The environment has forced us to adopt digital faster. There was already a lot of talk about, gee, we're headed this direction. This is what's going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. But just the onset of COVID forced us to accelerate. And so the acceleration, what we've seen is we have tried as a bank, and this was different for various banks, but at Columbia Bank, we tried to keep our lobbies open as much as we could. And obviously protect our employees with PPE and that type of thing during that period of time. But there is a trend towards lower lobby traffic and greater digital adoption by our clients. So clients, have always, in the last several years, had the ability to make a deposit through a tool called Remote Deposit Capture, where I could scan checks from my office and actually make a deposit. It was popular, but now it has surged because that's people realize, hey, I don't have to go to the bank. I don't feel comfortable being around a lot of people, so I'm going to do that. If I need to with the bank, I can call the bank, I can email the bank, I can do a variety of different things. And so we've seen a huge acceleration in that. You probably, as you have looked around the economy, and certainly Washington County has seen this, there are a number of banks that are choosing to close permanently some of their locations. The reason that's happening is, again, many of the legacy old bank buildings are too large. We don't need facilities as large as we historically have had. And so you're going to continue to see evolution in that area. And again, what 2020 did is it forced us to accelerate what was already happening. And that's a good thing. We've also seen, of course, work from home, the ability of many employees to work from home. And we have learned that it can work. It absolutely is something that's viable. And I don't think, I think we may see some people come back, but I also think that working from home is something we're going to see a lot more of going down the road.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on to our third question, and I'm going to start with Sean. So Sean, what do you see in 2021 bringing to businesses to your sector? So hopefully there's some hope, there's vaccines rolling out, and where's the opportunity for, I would say, rebound within your sector?
Yeah, so right now we're projecting growth is from nearly zero to some, if we're just being realistic. It's looking like 6 to 9 more months of restrictions. And even if we get to say 150 people allowed at event, that doesn't return our industry to normal operations, right? And then secondly, the area of growth, maybe some strength, will be outdoor venues. And we're seeing these, you're seeing these drive-in theaters pop up. We're seeing Zidale Yards turn into an outdoor concert venue. The appeal of these events will be strong and will be good, but they're going to help a segment of our sector, weddings and private events. Potentially some festivals return on a limited basis, but of course it's Oregon. So we're talking about the warmer, drier months. So you're talking about, late May, June, July, before we get to see a lot of that outdoor activity. Overall, selling to our sector in 2021, I think people are going to find fairly challenging. Most live events have been with massively reduced income for now 12 months on the scale of 60 to 90% loss. The last vetted stats that we have, it's not good for sure, Debbie. The industry's staring at finishing 2021 down 25 to 50%, depending on which sector you're talking about within our businesses. So the first half of 2021 looks much like the third quarter of 2020, with no real sign of uptick until June. And even then, again, it's that wedding sector, that private smaller events. We're unlikely to see corporate events or performances come back significantly in 2021. Perhaps 50% of fundraisers and sporting events, fairs, festivals get back online maybe by the fall there, September, October, November. So we are projecting to have a fairly strong and robust final quarter of 2021.
So longer recovery for your sector than other sectors.
Yeah, I mean, the hope for us, right, is if you look at the 1918 pandemic led into the Roaring 20s. So the hope for our business is that we're rolling into that Roaring 20s, right? So that's the excitement. 2022 will certainly be a boom year for our industry, I believe, as people are excited to get back out. We're a vaccinated nation at that point, and then the comfort returns, because we're staring at a fairly significant PR problem in our industry as well. When's it safe to get back to doing what we all love to do?
Right. I'm going to pop this question over to you, Dick. So what do you see 2021 bringing to businesses in your sector? Where's the opportunity for growth? And where's those opportunities for businesses that might do business with the healthcare industry?
First of all, let me say I love Sean's optimism. Right on. I hope that vision of the Roaring 20s is what we experience. So I would say that there's a personal opportunity here for all of us, as well as I'll call it a community opportunity. On the personal side is that all of us have been faced with a vision of our own health and maintaining our health. And usually it takes a malady like cancer or heart disease or something like that for us to face up to what is our health and what is our health future. So I think we're going to come out of this COVID time with a new ownership, hopefully a lot of us, in how we can maintain our health. And how that intersects with the healthcare system is that we need to be there as partners with you in order to help you maintain that health. And it's not a reactive thing when you come in with a malady, a kidney stone, the flu, or whatever, but what is the conversation that we can have with you about maintaining your health, not just good public health, but nutrition and stress levels and things like this, so that these issues don't rise up for you to have to go to the emergency room for a lot of things. Maybe things can be done on a lower level in your home and in settings like this, and perhaps even telehealth. And so I think that there's a personal opportunity here for all of us, not only in 21, but really, quite frankly, forevermore. Secondly, I think that there is this spirit of collaboration where healthcare and businesses in general don't need to do it on their own. So for example, we have some models of partnering with grocery stores. We have a model over in Northeast Portland where we have Chuck Tigard, who owns the Basics stores, has a grocery store embedded into our clinic. And we play off each other where we can tell our patients about the good nutrition value of locally sourced produce and meats and produce downstairs. And he offers nutrition classes, cooking classes, this type of thing. Hopefully that will return after COVID. And so it's partnerships like this that are very important. And then beyond just the commercial side of things, there's partnerships that we all can do in business and healthcare with good nonprofits. For example, the Good Neighbor Shelter in Tigard. Perfect example. If we want to do something around homelessness, let's not just talk about, let's partner with organizations like that, where we can help people literally get a home. I think it's very, very important. And this is an opportunity coming out of COVID.
Okay, Leanna, would you like to answer that question? So what do you see 2021 bringing to businesses in your sector? Where's the opportunity for growth for them, as well as other industries that might do business with those businesses?
Sure. Due to the fact that construction was not as significantly impacted, not in comparison to other industries, we expect still significant growth. Construction is beginning to be a more desirable industry for the fact that it has great family supportive wages, and you need little traditional education to really succeed in it. Not that it wasn't before, but our mindset in the child and teen educational realm was a strong push towards higher education. That mindset has changed over the more recent years, that now they want to give career advice that's appropriate for the individual's success. And then also paired with the racial climate. Specifically, obviously, for Latinos in construction or any other minority grouping, it has made certain public agencies more aware of this inherent racism that exists and the need for more equality or equity there. This has inspired them to evaluate and incorporate more inclusion efforts, and we think this is a start. I mean, it has great potential going forward.
Great, thank you very much. So Greg, for your sector, so slammed, not quite as bad as the live events industry, but you guys kind of overlap each other really. Where's the opportunity for growth and rebound? And is there opportunity for businesses that would actually be selling to you in your industry?
Yeah. So obviously we're hopeful that 2021 will kind of see this release of the pent-up demand. We're starting to see it a little bit as counties do reopen here in Oregon. People want to get outside, they want to dine with their friends, and when you think about it, your local restaurants are the places where you go to celebrate the big moments in life, right? It's the birthdays, it's the anniversaries, it's the proposals. It's even the Little League championships at the local pizza place. And so people miss that. They miss being able to gather, and as social beings, we need that kind of connection. So we're hopeful that as we're able to reopen, and we can do so safely, obviously, people will come back and do the dine-in that they've been wanting to do for a while. So for folks that help us, our partners that supply, again, as business hopefully grows, those opportunities will be there to help supply some of the things that we're going to need, whether it's those perishable items or the personal protective equipment. And you're going to see some changes, I think, in our industry that long-term will help with the way that we work with our partners in terms of those supply chain issues that I mentioned earlier, being able to do more outdoor dining. Again, a lot of cities were very receptive to expanding that. Some have even talked about making it permanent, more like the streetscapes that you see in Europe that are, open just for restaurant dining and other retail establishments in that area. For lodging, we're just hoping, again, that as people start to feel more comfortable and get out and travel, I know that locally, Travel Oregon and some of the local destination management organizations are really focused on local travel opportunities, whether it's rediscovering Oregon or just traveling across the state to get out and get a break from what have all become our homes and our home offices. We're hoping that people will get out and do a little bit more of that traveling as well to support the local businesses and tourism opportunities.
So would you see that opportunity more in that second half of 2021, most likely?
Yeah, I mean, again, as counties open up and we're able to do more, and as people feel comfortable getting the vaccinations, we do think that people are going to start to travel more locally. They're going to want to go to the coast. They're going to want to go to the mountains, visit Southern Oregon or Eastern Oregon, maybe places they haven't been before. We have an incredible state, and I don't know that a lot of people have seen everything that Oregon has to offer.
Right, I would agree with that. I've found some new things, and I've lived in Oregon most of my life. So Dave, last but not least, so what do you see 2021 bringing to your sector in terms of opportunities for growth, and also for businesses that are your industry partners that do business with you?
Yeah, 2021, I mean, I think what we're going to see is continued improvement in things. As vaccines become more and more prevalent and people become vaccinated and they're more comfortable being out, we see some of the restrictions lightening. Then what happens for us is as a bank, we're able to support the rebound. And so some of those restaurants that, sadly, some of them aren't going to make it. But those that do and are able to come back, we see increased activity in that particular area. Other industries that have been more negatively hit by COVID, we see a recovery coming with them as well. So where we sit, this is really interesting in the banking industry right now, it's a little counterintuitive, is most banks right now are swimming in deposits. They have tons of cash. And what it's coming from is various stimulus programs like PPP, EIDL loans were mentioned, and then the stimulus checks that come out. A lot of people, some people spend the money, they need the money. Some people are holding on to the money because they are fearful of what the future holds. And so they're holding on to liquidity. And, banks, our basic function is we accept deposits, we turn around and we make loans. So we see loan demand becoming stronger as we go through this year because we're there to help businesses recover. We are, Columbia Bank is the largest SBA lender in the state of Oregon. And we are continuing to see very strong SBA activity. So again, working with government programs to be able to fuel more growth down the road. That's really what we see going on. One concern I do have, and this will be interesting, it's I think a concern we're going to have to face the music on, is that there have been so many rent deferrals and programs like that. At some point, we're going to have to face the music as far as some of the deferrals that are out there, both in residential and commercial. And so we may see some increased stress as we get a little further down the path and people realize, gee whiz, I deferred this, but it was a deferral. It wasn't a forgiveness piece. So therefore, I've got to be able to pay some of this past rent and all that I have. So that's going to be a challenge as we get further through 2021. But we're optimistic. We think things will get better as we go through the year.
Great. So that kind of segues us into this next question. And you've touched on some of this, but what key factors do you see your sector will play for recovery? Which you've touched on that a little bit, but like interest rates, access to capital, lending, kind of what does that look like going forward?
Yeah, so comment on that. We've seen extraordinarily low interest rates. The 10-year Treasury since the pandemic hit dropped well below 1%. We've seen extraordinary levels of mortgage financing, people refinancing their debt in 2020 in order to lower the payments. It's been really an unprecedented level of mortgage activity. We're also seeing, again, people either refinancing to take money out to do improvements to their home, or you hear the real estate market continues to be very hot in terms of the inventories that are out there not being adequate to cover the demand. We do see the 10-year Treasury now rising over the last month. It has popped up now to almost 150. And some of that is natural and normal in terms of where we're at. There's a little bit of dialogue out there right now going back to the mortgage times of the past, where we may see the Fed kick in activities which we call Operation Twist, which is to basically try and push short-term rates up a little bit more, but drive long-term rates either lower or keep them where they're at. So we have a flattening of the yield curve so that we can continue with that long-term financing to fuel long-term capital borrowings, real estate borrowings, those types of things, which will help us over the long term. So we're still in PPP round number 2 at this point. That is definitely been slower than round number one. Round number one was very chaotic. The government moved very, very fast in round number one. And we literally we were flying the airplane and trying to put the wings on at the same time. PPP2 has been more organized, more structured, and definitely a push in PPP2 by the federal government to make sure that smaller businesses benefit from PPP, as opposed to round one, where we saw, of course, you could borrow up to $10 million, and some of the folks that did that probably maybe didn't need the money as bad as some of the smaller guys. So those have been welcome changes. We don't see the amount of money that was appropriated in round two going away. We don't see it being used up by 3/31, which is the end of PPP2. We'll see what Congress comes up with in this negotiation that's coming on right now, what there's going to be in the way of more possible physical stimulus for the go forward several months.
Great. Okay, so a little bit different twist on this kind of the same topic matter is the general question is, how did federal funding either impact or benefit your business sector for success? So I'm going to hop to Greg on that one to talk about it from his perspective.
Sure. Thanks. Well, as Dave just mentioned, PPP was pretty critical. The first one was rolled out quickly, but obviously there were some issues with it. The timeline for spending it when we were closed meant that it was difficult to pay people that you wanted to employ at a time when your restaurant wasn't open. So that was difficult, and quite frankly, some of our operators just chose not to take it because they knew that they wouldn't be able to spend it in a way that would be, within the letter of that law. So that was frustrating. The second round definitely was structured differently, and actually was structured in a way that helped the hospitality industry more, as opposed to 2.5 times payroll. For example, restaurants were able to do 3.5 times payroll. Which was huge for us, again, being shut down. So that was tremendously helpful. And then, of course, right now, we have the $25 billion in restaurant relief going through the Senate. The House had passed it. And so although not everything that we had asked for in the original Restaurants Act, which Representative Earl Blumenauer actually authored and sponsored, the $25 billion will be helpful. There is talk of another $120 billion in the Restaurants Act, which was the original one, but it's just been pared down. So a lot of that is going to be, how can we get that money out to those operators so that they can utilize it and utilize it in a way that is going to help. Even though we've been shut down, operators have still had rent payments, mortgage payments, utilities, all those kinds of things that have to be taken care of with little to no revenue coming in. As much as some have been able to pivot to takeout and delivery, it does not represent even close to what they were doing with indoor dining. And so the flexibility there is really what's needed. But even more importantly, and we can talk a little bit about this more in the next question, but our operators just want to reopen. They certainly appreciate the money and the help, the financial relief, but more than anything, they want to be able to reopen their doors and invite guests back in, and that's how they want to earn their way. So the federal money has definitely been helpful, and we appreciate it. It's helped some restaurants survive. And without more, we have some data from the National Restaurant Association showing that probably around 14% of Oregon operators will have to close in the next 3 months if the bill doesn't pass for economic relief.
Thank you very much, Greg. So I'm going to hop that over here to Sean. How did federal funding either impact or benefit your business sector?
Yeah, in a similar way to what Greg mentioned, PPP1 and PPP2, as great as they were limited in how we could spend that money. So our sector, same, not everybody took it because it wasn't going to help them. It's hard to use money for payroll protection when you have no payroll to protect because you have no employees that are able to work because, like I said, we're 12 months at not doing events here. So certain segments, it brought some temporary relief. Each of those rounds provided about 2 months of relief. We're staring at an 18-month problem. So you can do the math there, 4 months of help for 18 months. Not all businesses qualified, and many of our sector are skipping the PPP too. That's why Dave has seen some of that money sit there because you just don't know if you're going to be able to spend it the way that the government has laid out that you can. So at this point, the only way forward for most of our now cash-strapped small businesses is through a robust federal grant program. That's really, what we need and where we're headed and what we're asking for. Unemployment programs, PUA, PEUC, FPUC, successful when funded. Obviously, a lot of state level kinks that had to get through there early that created a lot of pain points. We are thrilled about the about to pass American Rescue Plan that will extend UI measures through August, but we also are fearful that that's not going to be enough. August doesn't quite get us back yet. The EIDL is successful, but it's a loan product, right? It's 30 years, it's 3.75%. But now our businesses are saddled with unforgivable debt. So this creates a problem down the road for us. Federal grants, very few received. The ones who did certainly benefited, of course. The EIDL grant from the first CARES Act, was certainly helpful last April. It was welcomed and needed. Additional targeted EIDL grant coming up in the ARP will be smaller, but nonetheless, we're still thankful for that money. And then the grants through the CARES dollars, we're appreciative of all the federal money. Like Greg said, it's helpful, it's needed, but these sectors, restaurants, lodging, hospitality, events, we have been, it's not an understatement to say it's been nearly catastrophic from a financial level. With massive losses and staring at more losses upcoming. Our dates and events are perishable. When the date comes by, it is no longer recoverable. Just like the food in Greg's industry, that food is perishable. You can't reuse it once it's gone. Our dates are perishable, and we've lost 12 months of those. We're going to lose 4 to 6 months of those. So we do need more help for our sector, and we are asking for that help at a national level.
Okay, I'm going to hop it over to Leanna. So in your industry sector, how did federal funding either impact or benefit your business sector for success?
I'm going to talk a lot like the others on the more of the impact rather than the benefit, although there's certainly benefits there. First round PPP, confusing, rapidly changing, created a ton of work for us and the businesses, helping them navigate that. And also we have a large amount of self-performing contractors out there. I'm not sure what the percentages in the industry are themselves, but certainly in residential, it's much higher. They're out there doing the work and they're the business owner. So therefore they're an independent contractor rather than an employee. So that, especially in the first round, that posed as a huge barrier for them. So then the businesses that were able to get it, it was impactful. It helped them keep their business afloat at the most difficult periods, and continue their business and for that. So that was great. But it was also a lot of our, and Latinos in particular, didn't even want to apply for it because of many of the biases that already existed against Latinos. It is known out there, and maybe some people in the banking industry know of this, but historically, they've kind of been red flagged as not somebody good to give to. So they weren't the first people on the list. So maybe they were passed up for others. PPP second round, much better, obviously. It was more generated for them and what they were doing. So then we also come into, we have people who are tax paying, wonderful people, but they're not citizens. So they didn't qualify for some of the funding there in the relief aids and so forth. And so that was a really difficult one. And then lastly, now these relief aids, so they have the commercial lease protection program that's coming out. They're for people who have gone into default, who, but they're not for the people who grabbed money from everywhere they could. They borrowed from a cousin, to keep their business afloat, because in construction, you need to be bondable. You need to be able, if you're commercial, you do not need any red flags on your record, because that affects your business. So they did everything they possibly could to keep themselves afloat and not go into default. But now that the programs that are being created are for those people that went into default, which I understand they have no other choice, but those programs are not available for them.
Great, thank you, Leona. That was really enlightening, things I hadn't thought about. So Dick, question to you. Did federal funding impact or benefit your business sector for success?
Well, it certainly benefited it, but I would like to say environmentally, and I agree with Greg, what Greg said about his businesses and owners. Doctors, by their nature, like to be independent. About 60% of Oregonians receive their health care through independent medicine of some sort. I represent 100 doctors, of which 50 are owners in the company, and they just want to be able to serve their patients, pay their taxes, do their job. And that's what we've done here at the Portland Clinic for 100 years. So it was somewhat of a jarring experience to realize that you needed help, federal help, public support. Yet the whole independent healthcare structure was on the verge of collapse back in March and April. So quite frankly, we swallowed our pride and we said, yes, we do need help because we want to continue to serve our patients. And the federal government was there for us through a lot of things, PPP loans, PPE, certainly this whole vaccine development. I mean, this is historic in this country, what the federal government did. So the federal government had healthcare's back. I think it had a lot of our industries back, and it really helped us through this time. And I just want to do a shout out to U.S. Rep. Suzanne Bonamici and U.S. Senator Ron Wyden in our congressional delegation. They were awesome. They were available to talk. They were hearing our stories, and they were acting on our behalf. And so as we go forward, I think that the government has been supportive, and now it's a time for us, as we can, to stand on our feet again and keep going. But it's been a very good partnership with the federal government.
I'm going to move to the last question. We are bumping up here on our time, so we might run a little bit over. But really quickly, the last question is, what barriers need to be removed to enable recovery? So Sean, I'm going to start with you. I think you've touched on some of this, but what do you guys really need to enable recovery?
We got to crush COVID. Like number one, we got to crush COVID. We got to get those shots in the arm for everybody that wants those shots in the arm. It looks like by mid-March, that demographic 65 plus will have those shots. That was the reason for this shutdown. And we need a plan moving forward that we show now. We showed the people right now what that plan looks like. We need a roll off of these restrictions in April and May and June. And by July 1st, we need to be open. We need to work. Just like Greg said, we need to work. Our people want to work. These are micro and small business owners. They pay their taxes, they do the jobs, and they're ready to work. But we need to make sure that the public knows that the vaccines, right now, current projections have us in a really good place by June. So our state needs to understand that based on those vaccine projections, we need to get this sector, this live event sector, back to work. Because when you say opening a business is different than opening events. Events take 3 to 15 months to plan in a planning cycle. And so, saying open for us is different than it might be for a brick and mortar location. State government needs to see the events industry as subject matter experts and key stakeholders, and they need to engage us as such. To do that, they need to recognize the breadth of our industry. It's not just venues. We really have to get that out there. It is not just venues. There are planners, producers, rental companies, AV, staging, scenic design, floral, specialty entertainers, caterers, and so much more to make these events happen. From there, they need to ensure that we have a seat at the table, advise their various agencies how we can make reopening as a state possible, and then communicate these guidelines broadly for the industry, because there's just a lot of confusion a lot of mixed messages out there and a lot of guidance that's not clear, maybe at different levels. So we really need to hone in that message and get reopened here sooner than later.
Great, thank you. So Greg, same question. What barriers need to be removed to enable recovery for your industry?
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. So we're looking at four primary areas, and Sean just mentioned one of them. It's vaccinating our frontline workers. The folks that are interacting with the public, whether they be the servers or the chefs or front desk hotel folks, those are the folks that need it. Not the ones working in the back office, but anybody who's having direct interaction with the public, they need to get that vaccination. We're also wanting to eliminate the extreme risk category. We need that indoor dining. Restaurants are safe places. Even before the pandemic, they were inspected twice a year by county health inspectors. They've gone above and beyond with filtration systems and the cleaning. I would dare say that any restaurant out there is probably cleaner than your own home and sanitized. And so we need to eliminate the extreme risk category and allow that indoor dining to happen. Coupled with that, we need to eliminate these arbitrary occupancy numbers. For a location like Old Spaghetti Factory in downtown Portland, they could safely seat probably 300 people in their restaurant, distanced 6 feet apart, making sure that they keep their parties together in their separate tables. But based on the arbitrary numbers of occupancy, they're going to only be able to have 100 people in their restaurant, and that includes employees. So we need to eliminate those arbitrary numbers. And last, the unemployment insurance tax rates have skyrocketed for our industry. Through no fault of our own. It wasn't market forces, it was government shutdown. It forced us to lay off employees. And because we had to lay off employees in such a high number, our unemployment insurance tax rate has more than doubled in some cases for our members. So we have operators who last year may have paid $7,500, now paying over $16,000 in employment insurance. There are a couple of bills, and we're working with the employment department on finding solutions for that. But we've got to take care of that problem. There's no money to pay that, and it's unfair to ask us to pay it when it was no fault of our own that it increased the way that it did.
Most definitely. So Leanna, what barriers do you see that need to be removed to enable recovery in your sector?
Sure. So mine kind of goes a little bit off topic only because it also relates to what's happening right here. Well, number one, education and or kids need to get back to daycare and education. Number one, because we have a workforce that has to be on site. There's no way that you can work construction from home other than unless you're an office worker. So that needs to be done. Number one, we need to make educating our community as the Latino community a priority, and also getting them vaccinated, because it's the one that it's really spreading rampant within that community. So we need to make them a priority there. There's also some federal and state restrictions due to citizenship that need to be addressed. In order for your construction business to move up, they need to be COVID certified. And this is a certification that ultimately makes them known and proved by the state that they are actually a minority owned business. There is a lot of restrictions there, and one being that you have to be a citizen for it as well, and that should be eliminated. So there, and then there's also, we've seen favoritism, almost highlighting a specific minority grouping or population, which it actually does the opposite of supporting those who have just this history of discrimination. So we need to stop doing that and focus on everyone in a whole and per their need, not highlighting or favoritism towards one.
Great, thank you, Leanna. So Dick, to you, what barriers need to be removed for recovery?
I echo what Leanna just said about having the schools appropriately reopen and daycare. A lot of our workforce are either single parents or young families, and with that added stress of having kids learning at home, we just can't get them attracted to the office as much as we would like to. I also agree with Greg that in healthcare, now most of healthcare workers, the frontline ones, are vaccinated right now. So it's safe to return to healthcare. There's a lot of guidelines and restrictions that we're following, and people need to feel comfortable to come back into healthcare settings. It's not a place where you're likely to be infected with COVID. And then last but not least, I would say the state of Oregon needs to look at pausing on certain things when they're looking at changes outside of COVID. There's a lot of transformation that's necessary in healthcare, but right now we're just getting back on our feet, and we have to be careful not to be over altruistic on certain things, and let's take things more pragmatically. But the legislature's meeting right now. There are a lot of important and impactful things involving healthcare there, all well-intentioned, but we really have to be careful on the pace of change and not try to overcorrect and make things perfect. And this is outside COVID measures. It's things like moving from fee for service to value and things that are going to help employers in the long run. But we have to be pragmatic right now and not jar things too much.
Dave, for you, what barriers do you see that need to be removed for recovery?
I'm going to agree with a lot of the things people have said so far. Obviously, vaccines is a huge thing. Being able to, and this is such a hard issue. The situation we have is obviously we need people to feel safe, and they will feel safer as more and more vaccines take place. And then we're able to open things up more and become more vibrant in our recovery. So the vaccine piece is huge in my mind. The other thing I mentioned in the last question is I think there's a lot more work yet to do in the how we're going to deal with rent deferral and how we're going to get through that so that we don't really kind of elongate the recovery as a result of more defaults and those kinds of things that will come. So that's one thing I think we need to really look at and be very proactive in how we address it. And the other thing, and this is along the lines of what Dick was referring to, is I think we need to be very careful. You know, when we get to the other side of all this, we're going to have a lot of debt, and that debt's got to be repaid somehow. And if we are too quick to jump tax rates up and do those kinds of things, we again run the risk of slowing things and really causing some challenges for the recovery if we accelerate trying to bump taxes up too quickly to try and do that. We get it. I mean, there's some of the benefits going to come from the rebound, and we need to be patient in that process.
Great, thank you all very much. So if you can hang on for a few minutes, we've got about a handful of questions from our audience, and one of them really ties to what Dave was just talking about. So we have a question from John Cook, and any of the panelists can answer this. If Oregon passes any of the bills in Salem that unconnect from federal taxable income, so like you can't take your net operating loss carry back, or it makes your PPP taxable, how will this affect your businesses? So anyone, feel free to chime in.
I'll just jump in there. I mean, it's very clear that what's going to happen is if Oregon chooses to take a path like that, you know, in order to, you know, the hidden agenda there is increasing tax revenue, and it's an increased expense and burden on our businesses. And again, we need to be very careful, I think, about doing that because we don't want to derail people.
Yeah,
COVID's been extremely punitive to, you know, a large segment of people already. We don't need to be further punitive to small business than we already have been through the closures and restrictions, and through no fault of our own. We shut down to protect our citizens. We did that. We sat by hoping that we would eventually be taken care of. We cannot be further punitive by taxing money that was intended to help.
Right, well said. As a business organization, I'm like, business is struggling enough. We don't need to layer more taxes or more complexity on them as we come out of this. So I have a handful of questions that are related specifically to Orla and potentially you, Sean, and I'm going to try to kind of consolidate, well, I can't really consolidate them. So one question for you, Greg, is House Bill 3296 getting any traction in the House? And what can communities and local restaurants and bars do to say no to more taxes?
Yeah, so House Bill 3296, if you're not aware, is the 26 or 2,700% increase in the beer tax and about a 1,700% increase in the wine tax. You know, it's a little early. There's a public hearing next week, I believe, on the bill. I've been part of a coalition, the Oregon Beverage Alliance, for the last 5 or 6 months that's been working to survey Oregonians on what they feel about an increase in the alcohol tax. This one's pretty egregious. It's pretty far out there. The Oregon Health Authority also has a bill that would increase the alcohol tax by 800%. So if this one goes down in defeat, the thought is that maybe that 800% one would seem reasonable after 2,700. I'm going to pop into the chat box a website. It's called don'ttaxmydrink.org. It's a petition that you can sign to say that you're against this alcohol tax. Part of the issue with it is it's not that they don't have the money, it's just that it's not allocated properly for addiction recovery, which is obviously a huge problem here in Oregon. But again, it's not a problem with revenue, it's a problem with spending. They're just not putting the money where it needs to go and allocating it correctly. So we are hopeful that it will go down, especially because it's going to impact wineries and cideries and breweries that have been hit incredibly hard over the last 12 months.
So kind of related to that along, taxes and fees and stuff. Another participant said, I learned this week the state of Washington is waiving liquor license fees for struggling businesses. Is there any plan to see a reimbursement program for liquor license fees as we saw in our Washington County Health Department license fee reimbursement? Those two licenses cost over $1,500, which we are operating at about 80% revenue stream lost.
Yeah, the liquor licenses have been difficult. And actually, we've talked with both county health departments and the OLCC about those licensing fees. It kind of makes no sense that you're being charged a licensing fee for your inspection on the number of seats that you have when you can't use those seats at all. So unfortunately, the counties are restrained a little bit in what they can do legislatively. OLCC, I will say, has been an excellent partner to work with as far as the state agencies go. As I mentioned earlier, they were quick to fast track the permitting process for the outdoor dining. They did just increase the liquor license fees, so I don't see that being forgiven at any time. But what they have done is they've allowed businesses and licensees the ability to defer those payments for at least 9 months so that they can kind of get back on track and then pay those. And they've been willing to work with people on those as we've seen throughout the last year. So we realize it's difficult. Obviously, the to-go cocktails is helping, but that's not going to make up for the amount of seats that you can get in a bar or a restaurant that are going to purchase alcohol on a more regular basis.
And then I have another general question between Greg and Sean. I think this has already sort of been addressed, but it'd be a good idea to summarize it. So this is coming from a nonprofit. So as a nonprofit, we've had to cancel our fundraising events like galas and luncheons. When do you see in-person events, large gatherings happening again? And do you see hotels and convention centers returning to in-person events this year? So either one of you are both.
It's a great question. What we've heard from the governor and the governor's people, it was a massive priority to get kids back in school. That was really the only thing the governor wanted to speak about for a long time. I think now that there seems to be a pathway to get kids back in school, maybe we can reapproach and get that conversation started. So far, it's been difficult, like Greg's noted. These occupancy numbers are just random and don't make a lot of sense. We really need the governor to engage Orla and Leo and let us give them the data that we have so we can support getting events back open. I would say larger scale events are certainly going to be like fourth quarter and beyond. We might get occupancy up for events to 150 or maybe 200 guests by maybe August or something, but bigger galas and bigger events indoors, it's certainly Q4 or Q1 2022 for my sector.
Yeah, I put into the chat box kind of the county risk levels and what's allowable for indoor and outdoor gatherings. You just probably saw the Oregon Brewers Festival canceled their festival for the second year in a row. That's an outdoor event. but the number of people that they were expecting, I'm sure, wouldn't fit under the 300-person cap, even in the lowest category. And so, you know, it's frustrating. And I think Sean's absolutely right. The focus was on getting the schools reopened. The governor is reconvening her, I guess, for lack of a better term, live events task force to start talking about what we can do this summer. I know that Travel Oregon has been in conversation with them about a lot of questions. You know, summer is a great time in Oregon. It's when a lot of people visit, but it's also when Oregonians have the chance to get out and do the kinds of things that we love to do. And so we're hopeful that we'll be in a place where we can get to that either lowest category or maybe even see a restructuring of those numbers. But it's definitely going to be later this year before we see any kind of a return to normal for events.
Great, thank you. And then I want to close it out with this one last question that's more general. It relates to workforce, so any of you feel free to answer it. So workforce is a huge concern. We've talked about people who found other jobs. You might not have that skilled labor available to rehire, but there's also somewhat of a concern about the lack of diversity potentially in workforce. So question to the group is, what are you doing differently to attract candidates back as you reopen or grow?
I'll just talk on behalf of the Portland Clinic and healthcare in general. So well before COVID, we were certainly focusing in on the diversity of our workforce and analyzing how we could be more diverse. We had a consultant doing DEI training within our business that was very important and engaging. We're continuing, and we continued that throughout COVID because it is very, very important. And our HR department is recruiting actively through websites that have diverse workforce applicants. And so we're really paying attention to this a lot. I think it's incredibly important, and this has to go on regardless of COVID. And so we're focused on here at the Portland Clinic, as well as I think healthcare in general.
Great, thank you, Dick. Anyone else want to answer the question?
Well, go ahead, Greg.
Oh, I was just going to say, we're fortunate to be probably the most diverse workforce of any industry. And with such a low barrier to entry, especially on the restaurant side of things, a lot of immigrants, people of color, find themselves able to open a restaurant or a food cart, you know, be able to do those kinds of things. And so we've been trying to work with those communities to make sure that they're supported, to make sure that they have the resources that they need. But obviously the diversity and equity and inclusion training that Dick just mentioned is a big part of what we're doing as we go forward as well.
I would just add too, we're doing a lot of the same things, and up to and including really looking at diversity all the way from our board of directors down through our workforce. We are very, very sensitive to this issue, and it goes back several years that we began really focusing on DEI and making sure that it's a priority. And also as we provide financing on all, really trying to look at communities that need additional assistance that historically haven't had the level of education that they need in the way of financial education. So we're very focused on addressing those particular areas as well.
Great. Anyone else want to chime in on that question, or are we good? Okay, so I thank you again to the panelists as well as our presenter. I think this has been a great discussion. Hopefully this is really useful to our business community. I'd really like to thank our sponsors again. So our presenting sponsor, Columbia Bank, as well as our supporting sponsor, Vantage Point HR. And today's webinar has been recorded and it will be available in the Tigard Chamber's webinar library. I would encourage participants to check that out. We have a robust selection of different webinars that have been recorded that can aid you in your business. And we also encourage you to check out the Tigard Chamber. As one of my staff says, we kind of went into beast mode this last year with our support of our business community. So we have a lot going on. So thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, Debbie.